1. Interface connection types in Mercusys MW305R. In this video, 1 interface connection types in Mercusys MW305R. We will have some quick tutorial on the different wide area network interface connection types in Mercusys MW305R. We will have a demo configuration for each connection types, and we will see if we will be able to have internet connectivity. So we have 5 WAN interface connection types, namely static IP or via dynamic IP. Then we have PPPoE, L2TP, and point-to-point tunneling protocol or Pptp. As usual, we will verify and test that on each connection types, we will be able to at least reach internet addresses. So this will be our topology for this video tutorial. So first, we have our Mercusys router MW305R, and we will connect it to another router or our ISP router. And this router is expecting us to configure a static IP address on our side, because this router is not providing any IP address to us. So in this configuration, the IP address of this router is 100.100.1. So we will configure this Mercusys MW305R router to be on 100.100.1.2 IP address. Okay, so I powered up our Mercusys MW305 router. So I've already browsed to the Mercusys quick setup page 192.168.1.1, and from here you'll see that we will now configure our WAN interface connection type. And as you can see, there are 5 options from which we could choose our connection type. So first will be our static IP. So from here, upon choosing the connection type static IP, we will now input our IP address. So 100.100.100.2, and for the subnet mask will be 255.255.255.252. For our gateway will be 100.100.1. Our DNS, so we will just put in some sample DNS. In this case, it's Google DNS. So let's review our setting. Connection type is static IP. IP address is 100.100.2. Subnet mask is /30. Gateway is 100.100.1. So this will be the IP address of our ISP router, and the primary DNS servers and the secondary DNS servers. So let's click next to accept. So for wireless, let's just get on with the sample entry and click finish. Okay, so this is our static IP configuration. So from here, let's go to advanced. And as you can see, the connected sign is checked. So connected, meaning to say the connection of our WAN interface is connected to our ISP router, but it doesn't mean it is really connected yet to the gateway. We have to test it. So we will do some ping test to see if we could reach our ISP router and then our internet addresses. So let's go to System Tools, and let's go to Diagnostic Tools, and let's do some ping test. Okay, so the IP address of our ISP router. Again, the IP address used in this demonstration is for laboratory purposes only. We don't own this public IP. Again, it's just for demonstration purposes only. Okay, so let's click start, and yes, there is a reply from our ISP router, our fictitious ISP router. From here, let's try to reach internet addresses. And yes, there is a reply. And let's try some domain name, for example, facebook.com. And yes, we are able to reach domain name such as facebook.com. Okay, so we have successfully demonstrated the static IP connection type. So next will be dynamic IP. So from here, we'll select dynamic IP. And for this connection type to work, this ISP router should be acting as a DHCP server, or there should be someone that is giving us an IP address when we connect to the port of this particular ISP router. So our case here is we don't put any IP address, and we are expecting that we could acquire an IP address from this ISP router, as well as other IP information such as subnet mask, default gateway, DNS servers, and other DHCP options if this ISP router is providing us with such information. Alright, let's click next. So for the wireless, let's leave it as what is configured here, as this is irrelevant in our demonstration. Let's click next and let's click finish. So let's check. Let's go to the network. And as you can see, we're now able to obtain an IP address, which is 192.168.254.253. Our gateway 192.168.254.254. That could be our ISP router. And we are also given the subnet mask and DNS servers. As usual, let's do some connectivity tests. Let's go to Advanced, System Tools, Diagnostic Tools. Let's try to reach our default gateway. So 192.168.254.254, and yes, we are able to receive a reply from our default gateway. Let's try a public IP this time. So quadruple 9, and yes, we are able to receive a reply from quadruple 9. Let's have a different domain name this time, and let's click start. And yes, we are able to reach a public domain name. Okay, so static IP and dynamic IP connection type is done and tested working. So let's try the third one, which is via point-to-point over Ethernet, or point-to-point protocol over Ethernet, or PPPoE. So our fictitious ISP router is providing us with the username, so PPPoE user, and the password will be inquirinity, so that we could supply here on our Mercusys MW305R. Alright, let's key in our username and password, or better yet, let's just copy paste from this notepad. Okay, so inquirinity, paste the password, click next, accept whatever wireless settings, and click finish. And let's go to network. And yes, we are able to obtain an IP address from our PPPoE server, or this ISP router. So take note, we only supply username and password, so we didn't configure any static IP or dynamic IP. So because the authentication is correct, or we are able to successfully authenticate with our PPPoE user and the corresponding password, so that is why this PPPoE server is providing us this IP address. Okay, so we have an IP address, but we don't know yet what is the IP of our PPPoE server. Okay, so let's go to Advanced, and from the Advanced menu, we don't have any clue as well. So how about we go to System Tools and let's check the logs. And let's see the logs. And yes, there is some clue here and information that the local IP, this is our IP, and the remote IP is 172.16.10.1. So meaning to say that could be our PPPoE server. Okay, so let's do some diagnostic tools there. And 172.16.10.1, and let's see if there is a reply. And yes, there is a reply from the PPPoE server IP. So how about, is there any internet connectivity? So quad 9s, and yes, we are able to reach. So for example, let's try to ping domain name, so www.mercusys.com. And yes, we are able to reach also public domain names. Okay, so our PPPoE connection type is also working. So next will be layer 2 tunneling protocol. So for simplicity, so this will be our L2TP server as well. So we have an ISP router that also providing L2TP service. So we have our fictitious ISP router L2TP details given to us. Username is L2TP user. Password will be inquirinity. The L2TP server IP will be 200.200.200.1, and we need to input, so we will choose static IP for this configuration or this sample configuration. So our IP will be 200.200.200.2. So let's try to configure. So we select L2TP in our connection type. Username is L2TP user. Password is inquirinity. And the server IP is 200.200.200.1, and our WAN interface IP will be .2, subnet mask will be 252, gateway will be the same as our L2TP server IP. So we have some primary DNS and secondary DNS as well. So let's review. L2TP user, our password is inquirinity. The server IP is 200.200.200.1. We are tasked to do static for now, and let's click next. So for wireless settings, let's just accept, click next, and click finish. Okay, so we go to network, go to basic, and as you can see, our connection type is L2TP. And we are able to get an L2TP IP address, so 172.16.20.200, aside from our WAN interface IP. So again, there is no clue in the basic, so let's go to advanced. Okay, so it's 172.16.20.200. So let's check the logs, system tools, system log, and if we could see any clue from here, and yes, there's a clue. So 172.16.20.1, and let's do some diagnostic tools. 172.16.20.1, and click start, and yes, we are able to receive a reply from our L2TP server IP. So let's do some public IP again. And yes, we are able to reach public IP. And let's try to do the same public domain name test. And yes, we are able to reach public domain names. For our fifth and last connection type, so static IP, dynamic IP, PPPoE, and L2TP was demonstrated and tested working. So this time we will configure point-to-point tunneling protocol. So connection type is Pptp. So our fictitious ISP router is providing us these Pptp details. So it acts as the Pptp server as well. in this demonstration. So the username is Pptp user, so we will just copy for simplicity's sake. Password is inquirinity. The server IP will be 200.200.200.1, and in this demonstration we are required to key in a static IP. Let's select the static IP and key in the IP address. Subnet mask will be 255.255.252. Gateway will be the same as our server IP. Primary DNS will be a sample DNS only. So we will just key in Google DNS. So let's review. We have a username, we have a password, we have the server IP, and we are required to key in static IP. So we will just accept the wireless configuration and let's click finish. Okay, so I go to network, I go to basic, and you see the connection type, and we see that we are able to acquire an IP address 172.16.30.200 and the internet DNSs same as our interface IP DNS. So quadruple 8 and 8.8.4.4, and let's go to advanced. So it's connected here, and again we don't have any clue on what is the PPTP server IP or the PPTP connection IP. So let us go to the system tools and system log, and let's check. And yes, we have some clue here. We are 172.16.30.200, and we have some 172.16.30.1. So go to diagnostic tools and type in the 172.16.30.1. See if we have a reply from this IP. And yes, we have a reply from our PPTP server IP. Let's do some internet connectivity test this time. So quadruple 9, and yes, there is a reply. And finally, let's do some domain name test from our previous domain. And yes, we are able to reach public domain such as www.youtube.com. And that will be our connection type: static, dynamic, PPPoE, L2TP, and Pptp. So in this video, WAN interface connection types in Mercusys MW305R, we have configured 5 connection types for our WAN interface. We have some option for static IP, dynamic IP, PPPoE, L2TP, and Pptp. We have verified and tested that on each connection types, we are able to successfully connect to internet addresses. I hope you find this video helpful and useful. Thank you for watching.